now we're moving on to our panel, which is the transformative power of data and reporting for gender diversity. What should be disclosed and why? How much data do we need? How do we make use of this data? Where does the data help us find the talent, and how can we make use best of it? To give us this big tour d'horizon of where we stand in terms of data and how we can use the data, we have 4 distinguished panelists. Amra Balic, she is the Managing Director and Head of EMEA Investment Stewardship Team of BlackRock, one of the biggest, I would say, the biggest investment company in the world, probably. Dr. Atacan Bertay, Director of Sabancı University Corporate Governance Forum, is with us. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Güven Özyurt, COO of Ford Otosan, Turkey's leading car manufacturer and the only company who made it to the Gender Equality Index of Bloomberg, and Sabina Mahmoud from New York, Product Manager of Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. Thank you for joining us all. Thanks to all of you for joining us from Turkey. Good afternoon, and from the United States. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning. First, I will just go by the order and give you at least 5 to 8 minutes of your time to give us a broad scope of where you stand. And let me start with Amra. Give us a scope of where do we stand in terms of the data and gender equality, how you make use of it as an investment company, and what should we learn from it?
So thank you very much. And first, I would like to say that it's a real pleasure and honor to join this conversation on such an important topic that is very close to my heart, both personally and professionally. In my opening remarks, I will try to cover 3 broad areas. Actually, I will start with very brief introduction of BlackRock and stewardship team and what we do on day-to-day basis. And then I'll move specifically on to diversity-related topics, from why diversity is an investment issue, how do we look at diversity as a global investor, and last but not least, what are our expectations from companies and how we work with companies in the cases where there is a lack of progress. I will also make some brief remarks around our experience with Turkey. So, as you noted in your opening remarks, BlackRock is the largest investment manager in the world. We are managing just over 10 trillion of US dollars as of end of last year. We are pure play asset manager. What that means in practice is that all the money, or every single dollar of those 10 trillion belongs to our clients. So people who have entrusted us with their funds to invest and manage and act as a fiduciary on their behalf. Our clients really are a very broad group, from people like you and I who are working and saving for retirement, so corporate pension plans, to sovereign wealth funds, foundations, charities, endowments. But they have a couple of very important common focus areas. One is that they have a very long-term investment goals. And the second is that they are relying on the robust, durable profitability of their investments to achieve their own financial goals. So the stewardship team is at the core of what BlackRock does as an investor on behalf of those clients. We conduct our activities as a voice of investors. So in our conversation with companies, we really do represent a voice of people whose money we invest. In terms of just also to add a very important point here, if you look at all assets that we manage, and if we focus for a moment on equities, more than 90%, so 90, more than 90% of our equity investments are through index funds. So we've done some research and looked at some of the data around length of time that companies remain in indices. And we have found a very interesting data point, which is that companies typically remain in indices 20 times longer than in any actively managed fund. So you can imagine that there is an important and an enormous responsibility that we take incredibly seriously when it comes to our work and engagement with companies that we are invested in. So very briefly, what do we do on a day-to-day basis? Engagement is fundamental to our approach. I often get asked, Amra, what do you mean when you talk about engagement? Engagement is really a conversation, entering into dialogue with companies to express our views on a range of topics. When we have concerns, and diversity is one area that I will move on to in a second, including on diversity, and when we feel that the companies are not making progress, we use our vote to express our concerns. And last but not least, we also work across market ecosystem, policymakers, regulators, organizations like 30% Club, to express our views on a range of topics, including diversity. We tend to focus on G in ESG or sustainability, so environmental, social governance, because we believe that what companies do in many of areas, including diversity, is actually driven from governance side, or it's governance of the organization. We also focus on environmental and social aspects that are increasingly taken into account in our conversations, even when it comes to diversity. And you mentioned the impact on diversity numbers as a result of pandemic, which is something that we have been talking to companies about their own workforce and impact of COVID, or the impact that COVID has had on their own workforce. So let's move on to diversity. Diversity has been, for a very long time, very central to BlackRock's approach to engagement with companies. I have heard several comments here that are very much aligned with our views. We see that the boards play an important role in developing and overseeing strong management teams. Role of women in those conversations is incredibly important. And if I think about my own career in financial services and as an investor, or acting on behalf of investors, which is almost 25 years now, when you think about big corporate governance failures, when you think about things going wrong with companies, what we can all draw a line and say, I'm confident that companies succeed or fail over time because of their people, and people in leadership positions in the board and executives that can impact how companies perform. Women, diversity as a part of that, if you want, corporate ecosystem has grown in its importance over the last decade, and we believe that it will continue to grow. We have for several years taken a very multifaceted approach towards evaluating board diversity. And why we talk about board diversity, why board diversity has been a really useful starting point. 2 points. One, for investors, we have a greater transparency around who is on the boards, board elections, but equally importantly, there is one shareholder right that is consistently available to investors across the globe, which is to appoint and re-elect directors. So it's a shareholder right, but it's also a responsibility that we take very seriously, particularly in the cases where we don't see progress. So where we don't see progress, we have used our votes on directors and the election of directors. To be very blunt, we have voted against the re-election of directors if we have seen lack of progress in certain areas. Diversity has been one of the top 3 reasons why we have voted against directors over the last 12 to 24 months across the globe. So data is absolutely key. Without data, we simply can't form our views. So we have, as investor in the public market, so we base our views, we base our conversations on the publicly available information. So in order to be able to enter into that dialogue, we need the data that is available in the public domain. So we have for decades been advocating for more transparency and disclosure around not just diversity at the board level, but increasingly around the senior management and what and how organizations are managing their workforce more broadly. So shortly, when I say shortly, I mean later this week, we will be publishing our updated priorities for 2022. An important aspect of those priorities is continuing. It's actually, I would call it, diversity is our evergreen topic when it comes to our priorities. Is going to be also looking at the broader workforce and how diversity is captured in the way that the management and the board are looking at their own key stakeholders, employees being one of the main ones. Just before I wrap a couple of points specific to Turkey, we have very much observed a progress over time. But I think, as we have seen through comments and some of the finding of research, that progress has been going in the right direction, but has been relatively slow. And there is still a sizable number of companies in Turkey that are yet to appoint a first woman on their board. We have, or we are already voting against the election of directors if or where there are no female representation at the board level, and we will continue to do so. I think I'm going to have some of my co-panelists talk about academic research in this space, but I think we, as many of you on this call, or all of you on this call, feel very strongly that rationale, if you want, for having a more representation of women, both on boards and throughout the organization, is a clear win-win, both for investors and companies alike. Just one final really important point. We are global investor, and what we find, and talking about diversity is a very different conversation, depending whether you are having it in the UK, where I'm based, in the US, in the rest of Europe, in Asia, or as a matter of fact, in Turkey, which is the focus for our event today. And we have to take that local environment, if you want, into account. We need to recognize the company's unique industry, market, geographical footprint that they operate in, and bring that into our conversations. So you will not be surprised that, for example, in the UK, we have been advocating for more than 1/3 of women on the boards, while in Turkey, we are actually still focusing on having across the market at least one woman on the board. So I think that context is really important. Local context is really important. Lastly, asking for data also has to be considered in that local context. I have been in situations where, I have been told, well, Amra, you know what, you are asking for this information, but in my market, and there are some Western European markets that I'm talking about, when I'm thinking about when I'm talking about this, where simply asking for a lot of personal data is simply not allowed legally. Yeah. And again, as an investor, we need to take that into account. So really focusing on this agenda, pushing, if you want, for progress, has to be within the context of what is allowed by law and regulation, while really as an investor, from investment perspective, this is here to stay. So data, absolutely key. I look forward to comments from my co-panelists, and I hope for a fruitful and good discussion. Thank you very much, and thanks for this opportunity again.
Amra Balic, thank you. This was a great opening for the panel, and I'll just quickly move on to Dr. Atacan Bertay in terms of how the points that Amra made, how you see it in the Turkish perspective, and from the public point of view, why it matters for us.
Yeah, thank you very much for Amra's discussion as the first panelist. And let me also start by saying I'm very happy to be part of this panel, because the insights provided by other panelists will be a fantastic opportunity to learn more about how investors, real sector, and the data providers think about the importance of data for gender diversity and economic consequences. The first point I would like to make is that today, I'm going to provide a perspective from an academic researcher on gender-related issues. The main motivation to study gender equality as an economist comes from the fact that gender equality and the empowerment of women are not merely an issue of human rights or moral issue, but it's an economic necessity, and this was already touched upon by our in the opening remarks, as well as the keynote speech. And it's central to developmental agenda. So anyone who are interested in economic progress, welfare, and getting, developing countries progressing into high-income countries, gender is a critical issue. And the first step to document the economic importance of gender diversity is to measure it. So we can't really talk, we can't say much about something which we don't know how big it is. So if we can't measure, we can't talk about it. So even talking about simple correlations, say about like how diverse a board is or how much of the workforce is female, we can't talk about simple correlations between firm performance or country level growth rates with gender related measures, and let alone establishing causality rather than and going beyond simple correlations. So obviously, being an empirical researcher myself, I cannot stress enough the importance of data at every level, from macro data of country level measures to micro data, which is like at firm level or individual level. And I think that will provide important insights to investors, the real sector, and of course, financial data providers. I can start talking about macro measures and why they are important. For example, women's workforce participation or laws and regulations affecting women's economic inclusion. So if we have such data, and we have quite some of those, we can talk about how gender equality or gender diversity, both at the board level, management level of firms, but also workforce participation, how they're important for economic outcomes. For example, using industry level data on female employment, together with my the IMF colleagues, we actually showed how gender equality has a causal impact on economic growth. And this is critical because simple correlations between better gender equality or gender diversity and economic growth or firm level growth may suffer from endogeneities, meaning that higher economic growth is also mostly related with higher gender equality. So having industry level data, and this is provided by United Nations, is critical. It's a must to have if we do such causal analysis. And all such research is actually ammunition for for investors and developmental economists and as well as the policymakers, why we should pursue gender equality agenda. Research will support reasons why the firms should get more women on board, why firms should hire more women in their workforce, etc. And it can also help to explain why firms are not doing it. Like that, such insights coming from research, of course, needs data as inputs. For example, one study we do actually in Turkey with Mel Savage and my colleagues from Sabancı University, we collected data on banks' boards as well as their executive committees. And we of course can relate these with bank level profitability, risk taking, and credit provision. But we go one step further, and we also include the bank's workforce into analysis, and that helps to explain how the gender of the workforce and the gender of management may actually interact. And that may be a point, possibly missed by investors as well as the firms themselves or the banks themselves in that case. What we, for example, our preliminary results show that, having more women on board is good. Like say that the banks are providing more credit, but actually if you have more women on your workforce, you actually provide even more credit. So there is a positive interaction. There is a synergy between workforce and gender on board. And one thing which is very important again is that if we didn't have this data, we wouldn't have been able to show it. For example, the workforce of the banking system is not very much available in other countries. Maybe one last point. Regarding individuals' career path. So how can women, through their career, develop into directors in different companies? For such analysis, we also need data. And that data is in the hands of many policymakers and government institutions. For example, in a project in Netherlands, we are using the universe of workers in the Netherlands, so that we can actually identify each and every person's career path and how much they are, how much they are making, whether they are progressing to directorship, etc. So we can use such data if provided by, if it's made public by the institutions like the tax authority or the government. We can use that data to provide extra insights, helping to develop gender equality and gender diversity agenda. As I mentioned, this type of from macro to micro research will help, I think, everyone, including the policymakers, investors' decision making, and possibly most importantly, the firm level decision making. So the insights from real sector, I'll be looking forward to hear from the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, which brings us perfectly to the experience of Ford Otosan, which made it to the list, the Gender Equality Index, and from what Dr. Atacan Bertay has explained, how at company level things work out. If you have more people on top, does it also help the people from the middle levels to go up? Let's hear from Mr. Güven Özyurt, the COO of Ford Otosan. Güven Bey, buyurun.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me as well to be with you together, share what we have and learn what you say. There are many insights already shared, so I just would like to give a little bit background about our story. Before I start, Ahu Hanım, I would like to just respond what I think about the data and the power of data.
Yeah, please go ahead.
In managing the transformation. I believe, other than what was said, I also believe that in order to progress, we need in total three things. One, an ambitious target, data to measure it, and very close follow-up. And beyond that, of course, sharing that data transparently so that you understand where you are and you allow others to show themselves and progress all together. Our story has been started with 2015. We've been really working around the things, but it just started with the refreshment or revision of the company vision. The company vision since then was that, being the most valuable and most preferred industrial company of Turkey, which is 13,000 people. And 3,000 of them are working in the offices and 10,000 of them are working in the field, shop floor. So while setting up this vision, we just ask one key question to ourselves, whether we can achieve this without equality, without diversity and inclusion. And the obvious answer was very simple. So then things started to roll very quickly since then. In 2016, we've signed the Women's Empowerment Principles developed by the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, UN Women. The same year, we became the first automotive company to be issued for the Equality of Opportunity certificate given by Women Entrepreneurs Association. And it started to even getting faster. In 2019, we ended up with publishing our diversity policy. And we all believe that the more equal, inclusive, and ideal world will be possible with changes in our language and behavior. And as companies, we can do and show what we can do on this one to progress ourselves and to give some insights for the rest of the industry or elsewhere for doing the similar or different things to achieve. And of course, I can say that this hasn't been an easy, journey, has been so far, and it's not going to be easy going forward, because as we go down the road, we face with the many things, the judgments, the things that we do, we think, but we don't know. We think or we are behaving accordingly, unconsciously. Then, of course, we set an ambitious target when we first get started with this one. It is simply like this. So we said 50% of our office employees should be women. So 50-50 equal stand-up should be available by the office employees, and 25% for the shop floor people at first stage. At first stage for shop floor is important because in shop floor, in some of the areas, some of the roles, there are some restrictions already that we are facing with, and we are thinking to find solutions to, avoid or eliminate. That in some production areas, you are not allowed to, introduce women employees right away. We need to change the protocols, we need to change the regulations, we need to work together with the relevant parties to make it happen. So since then, we have been, restricted the hirings to achieve that percentages. We also set the similar targets for the different levels of the organization. And this is through the, leadership levels up to the top. So where the challenges, similar to what I explained in the shop floor, that in some certain shop floor places like body assembly, welding operations, like press stamping operations, at the moment it is very difficult or nearly impossible to introduce women employees, which we are going to work and we are going to extend. Because in the rest of the areas, we came to a threshold level. We are able to see we can reach this 25, but in order to go further, we can, while continue with these areas of possibility, we should change the things on the areas of currently not possible. Looking back to the office employees, we have discovered that in first level of management level, it's okay. Hiring wise, it is also okay. Okay means not enough, but it's possible. Going to the higher level of managerial levels, there are challenges. This is the area where we are now working on that one. If we, time allows us, I can share some other insights about this one. So we just cut the numbers level by level, each an individual level, each and different role.
Have you frozen? Oh my,
Sorry?
yes. Yeah, we can hear you back. We just lost one of your sentences.
Sorry. So breaking down into the pieces of one plant, the other plant, one department, the other department, in order to understand the dynamics and identify the bottlenecks, split it into different functions.
There we go again. Can you hear it? Yeah. Okay. You just mentioned you broke it down into bottlenecks, departments, and you identified the bottlenecks, and maybe have your final sentence, and then I'll come back with questions to you. Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that how we utilize the data to understand where are the things. So running with the averages, running with the flat numbers is okay. In so many initiatives we put in place in the company with our partners and with the automotive industry. I can mention maybe later on, but in order to trigger the bottlenecks, avoidance of the bottlenecks, to hire more. Even we initiated a program in 81 cities with more than 16,000 students in the high school. We went there with our professional.
Breaking up. I'll come back with that high school's question to Güven, because you're from Fort Otosan in a minute. That was some experience that we were talking about, because it looks like on the professional level and the technical level, women do not hesitate to come up. If you can tiny bit complete your sentence about the high school, sir. I'll move to Sabina, and then I'll come back with a question to you. Güven Bey, can you hear? Yeah. No.
Percent office employees in a company like Fort Otosan, where you have 85 to 90% engineers, we found out that in the universities, there are not enough women engineers. And going back, we understand that, in high schools, there are some choices. This is for women, this is not for women. Engineering work may not be for women. So once we discover that one, in order to break that, we just initiated a social responsibility project with the volunteer people from Fort Otosan. Go and explain this to the old students, women students, their mothers and fathers, and their teachers as well. And the aim was to trigger a shift in the minds of the people that engineering, roles are also okay for women. Here are the examples. Thank you.
Thank you. That STEM education and technical knowledge is one of the challenges that we've been talking every day, almost on a daily basis, with several successful Turkish companies, whether they can hire enough engineers or STEM educated women, young women, to be on their workforce, who would go up the ladder and become executives at the end. But let me toss the word to Sabina Mahmoud, our great friend from Bloomberg. She is the product manager of Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. All we've been talking today is about the data and how we make use of the data, Sabina. Tell us about, from your perspective, how you use data and how you want companies to use, or decision makers to use the data. What sort of data are we talking about, and what's good for us to make it more, more transparent? Or as Amra just mentioned, should it be localized? Should it be simplified? What is your take?
Thank you, Ahu, and thank you all for including me today. For the first time, I'm actually excited to speak or introduce myself last, because I think everyone has already touched upon the work that we're focusing on, right? Thinking about investment demand, economic development, and corporate accountability of gender equality, and how that relates to the work that we are doing day in and day out within Bloomberg and externally. So as you mentioned, I focus on a product called the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, which sits now in our larger sustainable financial solutions portfolio. It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
We began over 7 years ago now, though, as a pilot program in our chairman's office, Chairman Peter Grauer, who actually leads the US 30% Club as well, identifying a gap in social data reporting. Increasingly, we saw governance factors becoming more transparent, a shift in focus to environmental, social, and governance themes, ESG, social historically lacking beyond representation on boards. I mentioned we began as a pilot in the chairman's office and shifted to our sustainable finance solutions portfolio, which really speaks volumes of the business case for diversity. So the process which we focus on is really helping firms identify what they can be measuring in order to manage effective change. And then as a data provider, providing standardized metrics back to the investment community, right? So holding corporations accountable through transparency. For those who are participating, we like to think of the process as twofold. First, a framework to understand what you can measure in order to manage effective change, as I said. And here we're focusing on 5 key pillars, the most extensive or one of the most robust frameworks that exist in this space, but for what we feel is a good reason, right? First, we are focusing on your leadership and talent pipeline. So understanding beyond just governance factors, representation of women as senior managers, middle managers, in entry-level positions, as Güven mentioned, looking at representation in engineering roles, technology roles, and understanding opportunities to upskill women in the workforce. So rather than focusing on hiring for the sake of hiring, many of the earlier speakers mentioned, this is more so about developing equal opportunities for everyone to move up within the firm, right? So focusing on what we call the pipeline. The remaining 4 pillars then help to support that. If you've identified a gap, can we focus on other areas as potential root causes of this gap? So looking at themes like equal pay and gender pay parity, inclusive culture, right? The hardest to quantify, but an area that has become critical, absolutely table stakes in the time of COVID-19. focusing on anti-sexual harassment policies, right? Is this a safe environment to work? Right? And lastly, your pro-women brand. So thinking of essentially anything outside the four walls of the company, how you're giving back into the communities in which you operate. Right, Gwen mentioned the programs in high school, thinking about upskilling and returning to work after extended career breaks, for example, fostering inclusive products. So that's piece one, the framework, robust, but available to corporations based on optional disclosure. That optional piece is critical, right? Everyone is at their own pace. Everyone is at their own stage of this discussion, and we should support them wherever they are, whether it's the first step or if they've been reporting this information publicly for years. The second piece is comprehensive scoring and index inclusion, right? So how can they drive value through public disclosure? By comprehensive scoring, we can benchmark them against their peers, so companies can identify opportunities for growth, and of course then be considered for index inclusion delivered back out to the investors. And this comprehensive scorecard is completely transparent, right? And it breaks down line by line where opportunities lie within the organization relative to peers. So it's critical to say we're not comparing financials to technology, for example, where financials may have been focusing on transparency here for a bit longer. And actually, surprisingly, of course, when people start this process, their first question is, how do I make the index? How do I become included in the index, right? They want that stamp of approval. It very quickly becomes, how can I identify and improve over time, right? When they take a look at that scorecard. So as I said, really understanding how you can set attainable goals and develop over time, right? So thinking about the process in its entirety, we're really driving accountability through public transparency, right? So once you put it out there, it's hard to take back, right? Once you've identified that problem, you want to move forward. Overwhelmingly, there is work to be done. We do see the data and numbers improve, and I'm sure we'll get into the panel discussion of certain indicators that we're looking at. But what I will say is, just to end on a positive note, is we really want to think about all companies taking this first step towards data disclosure, right? Most commonly, it is not a conscious decision to demote women or promote only men in certain roles, but rather a lack of identifying where the problems lie and the root causes. So if we can really understand, for most companies, what's critical is understanding what to measure, right? For many, this is data they've not even captured yet. So first identifying what's critical to capture. For others, they've captured the data, but not at the global scale, right? So when we think about scaling for our larger organizations. And lastly, perhaps they have the data, but they're quite simply not ready to talk about it publicly, right? So when you add that scorecard, it gives you a piece of paper, right, to take to your executive team and say, we have a problem. And this is pen to paper where our problems are and how we can fix them, right? So you can no longer deny the issues or successes, and that is critical to moving forward.
Excellent. Let me move on to quickly questions to Dr. Atacanberta. Sabina nicely mentioned how data shows us the problem and whether we should match them up or not. Some companies may not even think it's a problem. How do you make that data say, hey, wait a minute, you have to solve this. This is an issue. It's like, wait a minute, my balance sheet is perfect. I'm doing all the great things. The stock is going high. Where do you see the problem? How do you identify?
So excellent question. And this is exactly the point I was trying to make about the importance of research in this topic, right? So the such data or scorecard mentioned by Sabina and firms like Gwen mentioned, like they're trying to capture what's going on. They are trying to get better on gender equality and diversity. The point is, you may think as a firm, you may think you are doing good, but you don't have the counterfactual. You don't have the version of the firm with more women on board, with more women on the workforce. And this is exactly what the research is trying to do. We are not necessarily just providing like simple correlations, but we are trying to say that, look, you may think you are okay, but you could have done much better for your investors, for your stakeholders, actually. And that will lead to such an environment. So the impact is not just at firm level, but it will have an impact also at the macro level, because basically gender equality is a low-hanging fruit. So you can, if you can progress in terms of gender equality and gender diversity, you will not only make your firm grow better, but you will make the economy to have a better growth performance, which in turn will help your firm to get even better. And this is how you get development, to the good development outcomes.
Let me move quickly to Amra. What is your take, Amra, on this, whether identifying the data as a problem or seeing the problem in the data and how it affects the investor's perspective? You mentioned in your opening remarks that you do select, or you do, BlackRock does look at the numbers and data in terms of investment decision, but do you tell your companies, your portfolio, that, hey, you can do better in this, better in that, maybe you should try?
Absolutely, and which is a really nice segue to talk about expectations from investors when it comes to diversity. In the broadest possible terms, actually, I would say that today we are talking about gender diversity, but there is much more that we can talk about diversity. But maybe for another day. In our conversations with companies, when we go into meetings with companies, we very much start with looking at what is publicly available and identifying potential areas where we want to explore more and want to get a better understanding, particularly if there are gaps or the company is not in line maybe with our expectations. And absolutely, in our voting guidelines, if you look at BlackRock Investment Stewardship website now as we speak, our voting guidelines are very clear on our expectations on diversity, and they are equally clear around what action we will take in the case where, for example, like in case of Turkey, there are still several companies with no, not even one single on the board. I do want to maybe just use this opportunity to highlight something that has been mentioned throughout this session, but maybe has not been given what I feel is a due importance, which is the point around pipeline. Sabina mentioned it in her last comments. We really need to look at the kind of the whole organization and what companies are doing, really from taking the graduates in to how those women grow and develop in their own organizations. And I think that is only then we can really start to create, in some cases, reinforce good behaviors, but also create remedial processes and actions to help women stay, grow, and develop their careers. I equally hear a lot from women who have gone through this kind of growth, through young women coming into workforce, growing through ranks, getting to the senior position, who tell me, Amra, it was so hard. How can we help next generation? And as a mother of two daughters, I said at the beginning, I have a personal and professional interest in this. There are a lot of things that we can do. And one is certainly a focus on the remedial actions and the areas and the maybe stages in the women's life when they leave workforce and never come back. So what can we do better at that point to really make sure that the women stay and they have opportunity to thrive? So that pipeline, what we do with the pipeline, how we build a pipeline, is absolutely key to the overall success.
I have a quick question to you, and maybe to Güven at the same time. When men in professional careers switch gears or switch areas, it's totally okay. You can start from the factory level, then you move into design level, and then you get an MBA and go into the executive. It's totally okay. Do women have a difficulty in switching lanes and maybe, or taking turns and trying something new in the factory that they come? They just want to go into the one position and then hierarchically go up, but never take the S roads or the U turns and everything?
Actually, there is nothing really stopping to progress in that way. There are two things on this one. For the ones, as I explained in earlier part, the women students picking up the departments.
Yeah.
There is a background of it, as we all know it. It goes through family, the overall surrounding environment whatsoever, and even people are not aware, but they memorize in that way. So, but there are examples. As they see examples, they may change their decision. This is what we have discovered within the company. Of course, taking the women leaders through the steps of the organization, we also faced some good things, very good progress, and showed that this is also possible. This is nothing stopping us. But in the meantime, we also discovered some of the bias underneath, despite we've measured so long in this journey, because as I stated, unconsciously, you are even not aware. So the awareness sessions has been always part of our journey, and it is still the case, because there are many people coming in. It's a big company, people can forget about it and blah, blah, blah. So in that regard, as Sabine also mentioned, scorecard, the target setting is the real thing that triggers the energy. Yes, there are challenges, but day by day, there are possibilities visible, shown, and organization becomes more courageous about demanding that or hearing that. As I stated, we spend a lot of time in the there are some programs we initiated for the fathers to enlighten them that they have some roles in their father role, growing their children, so that children grown.
Here. Güven Bey. Oh, lost him again. Before getting back, I have a viewer question to Ata Can Bartay, Dr. Bartay. Güven Bey?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll have to pause you for a minute because we lost the last part of your sentence. But here's a question to Ata Can from our audience. You mentioned that in your research, a correlation about women on board of the banks and the credit given to women
provision,
customers.
yes.
Positive.
No, not actually women customers. So this is a perfect again point regarding data. So it would be the analysis we are making is that we are looking at bank balance sheets, right? This is exactly the example you gave. We are looking at bank balance sheet, and then we have data on corporate governance indicators, such as the share of women on board. And what we do is by keeping some factors such as bank size, bank ownership type, etc., fixed. What's the correlation? What's the relationship between share of female in a bank board and the growth of credit of a bank? And this is sort of the correlation we were after. And the point is that, for example, when you look at that relationship on its own, you may not necessarily find a statistical relationship. But then when you use workforce, the female workforce as well, you can show some synergies showing that, look, if the bank has a high female share in its workforce, only then actually you get some significant relationship between credit provision and the woman on board. But the point regarding credit to female business owners, for example, or female household heads, and this is again about the data. So we know that the data is out there because the policymakers, the government has the data at loan level. If it's made public, then we can also talk about how direct female on board, female on board of banks, are associated with more credit provision to females. there is such papers, and there is also some work through lab experiments where you put loan officers to labs and then make them analyze some credit applications. So the data is everything for us. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. A question to Sabina. We know you have some relations and some cooperation with the 30% Club. Could you give us a glimpse of what that is, maybe, from the point of view of Bloomberg?
Absolutely. So we are a member of the 30% Club. I mentioned our chairman, Peter Grauer, sits as the US chair and founder of the 30% Club in the US. And we've been working quite closely locally, specifically in Turkey as well, with Dr. Melsa, on opportunities for collaboration, right? So understanding at the framework level, you know, what is the bare minimum, right? And Amr made this point, what do companies have to be disclosing to move forward? So beginning with the bare minimum as critical, but I'll echo, it is in fact the bare minimum, right? So working to identify what are key themes, you know, opportunities within the pipeline, for example, is a theme we're looking at quite closely. And then, you know, a scaled approach, how can we develop that over time? So we partner closely with all 30% Club members to think about how we can help their active participants identify these gaps. And I will actually add, if I may, a comment to your previous question that Guvin started to speak to. We can identify gaps within the pipeline, but it is critical to then take the next step and assess potential root causes, right? So some of the barriers you mentioned around females moving up in the organization are largely relating to culture, corporate culture, environmental culture, restrictions in that way. So for example, if we can identify, you know, at the hiring level across all sectors, there is a clear need, right? It's the easiest to hire at parity, right? So overwhelmingly across all sectors, we see the closest to parity at the lower levels of the organization. But very quickly, they're falling off, right, as you approach the senior management ranks. For example, if you're losing talent between middle management, female talent, between middle management to senior management, what do we know about the culture at that stage, right? Perhaps it's women starting families, for example. Can I then look at my inclusive culture? Am I offering family care, child care, fully paid time off? The US is an example of the only OECD country that is still not mandating fully paid time off, parental leave. We're moving in the right direction, but very far behind others. So these are things that we could think about in terms of culture. We look quite closely at board representation, right? I mentioned, again, we started with the work of the 30% Club to increase board representation. And we do see a relationship of women on board to women as executives. So quite simply, if you have a more diverse board, you have a more diverse executive suite. However, interestingly, what we then looked at is women as senior managers and that relationship to revenue generating functions, right? Or those pipeline positions. And we see actually the greatest correlation is in fact more senior women as senior managers, the more women you have in revenue producing functions throughout the entire firm. Why is that, right? There can be many reasons as to why that is, but quite simply, you know, the women as senior managers are in positions where they're enacting these policies, right? They are on the grounds implementing policies and understand the culture around them. The last piece that I will add in terms of, you know, barriers for women moving up within the organization, if you see yourself in leadership, you will stay within a company, right? If you can identify and see where your future lies within the company, you will stay there, or more likely to stay there. If you are a woman and you only see male managers, you can't picture yourself in that executive suite, you'll find opportunities elsewhere, right? So it's some of those cultural barriers and kind of what you see around you that is critical. Data as the first piece, but then taking that step towards collaboration, working with partners like 30% Club, external organizations who are focusing on actually implementing those inclusive policies and support in that way as well.
That environmental factor, you know, being yourself in the managerial position, envisioning yourself. That sounds so familiar in Turkey to many women. But Güven Özyurt had a tiny bit of an experience about fathers, and I was so excited to hear about it. Could you tell us and recap it for us, please?
Yeah, the two programs we have initiated to transform the culture and to clear out the judgments. One is to the families, the mothers and the fathers, to be aware while growing their child, because without knowing, without being aware, they are just imposing some of the judgments into the minds of children. And there are many other, variety of, these symbols, even little symbols, just making, increasing the possibility of later years. This is for women, this is for men, and things like
toys, even colors and toys, right?
All sorts. The other one was related to specific to fathers, how they need to participate further in order to contribute more to the childhood periods. In many of the occasions we hear that this is already dumped to mothers, and it's one of the reasons why in the professional career steps multiple roles on the shoulders of the woman. But in the cases of it is balanced, the situation would go in a different way. So it is underlying factors are too many, but there are things that we can do to take it further. And there was one discussion, very valuable discussion, I just would like to quickly contribute. We are doing some progress, but how about the others? Despite our progress, to me also is not sufficient. We need to do more, we need to go further, and which will be the case. The partners, the companies like Ford Otosan and many of the companies have stakeholders. One of the important stakeholders are the suppliers. We have a couple of hundred suppliers. We have supplier partners. It took
happens. I am so sad about Güven Özyurt. He's telling all the good stories and he's breaking up. This is not fair. We should.
we also need good infrastructure.
Good infrastructure. Yeah, well, what about the suppliers? 2 sentences max. Come on, you can do it. Güven Bey, can you hear us? No, for God's sake. I'll come back to him for a final word, but I have one tiny bit of question then to Amra. Sabina, to you again, what's the impact of being listed in the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index? Is there any document report that we can share with audiences about it? This one's for you. I'm running out of time, but you can give it a shot.
Absolutely. So I will comment on it, and I will mention actually BlackRock is a GI member as well. So inclusion in the index brings visibility of the work that you're doing, right? So you're showcasing your commitment to transparency and data performance, right? So we're scoring companies both on disclosure and data performance. And then in turn, you can track the performance of those companies committed here, right? So indexing these companies for investment decision-making. There are a series of benefits of index inclusion, but I'll add index inclusion is not the only benefit of participation. Any company disclosing data through this framework, in turn, we publish their information through the Bloomberg terminal. So you can showcase your commitment to transparency and accountability. And Güven had begun to mention, this is not a one and done mechanism, right? We're not measuring once and moving on. You need to constantly reassess where you are. If we say we've achieved something or quite simply stop measuring, we won't move forward, right? That's how we're perpetuating living in this false reality of being perfect. So through index inclusion, you're showcasing your commitment, you're tracking your performance, among the investment community. So we track that along the Bloomberg terminal. And lastly, what we've begun to do in recent years is develop robust insights. So exactly as Dr. Atakan had mentioned, thinking about relationships, right? Actual takeaways of the data. How can we use this data to drive change? So we're happy to share with the wider group on the line. We did develop an extensive insights report. Actually, we just published it late last month with the most recent findings of the 2022 Gender Equality Index. This is ranging anywhere from disclosure, what it looks like at the global scale, and relationship with regard to data performance, right? What are companies doing well? Where are there opportunities to grow? So year on year, we use this to benchmark and really, hopefully drive positive change and build on the business case for equality, right? So more than just investment dollars, we see a business case for equality in many ways. When you think about employee retention, for example, right, you're saving money. Quite simply, you're investing in your employees. You want them to stay within the organization. If your employees are loyal, right, they're building more inclusive products. They understand the communities in which you operate. These are all financial benefits, of a diverse and inclusive workplace. So that's really, what you're showcasing through participation in the Gender Equality Index.
Amra, any final remarks that you would like to share with us?
Yes, I think inclusion surely has to be, this is clearly not simple. But I do think that equally, there is a lot of recognition that this is a topic, that an issue, actually societal issue across the globe that has to be addressed. And keeping the topic of the whole event today around data in mind, when one deals with, or when organizations, be it investors or corporates, deal with something challenging, when they need to address something, we have to go back to facts. What are facts? Facts are data. And that enables us really to move forward. Without it, as a corporates, you can't move forward, or you can't move forward in the right way. And for us as an investor, we can't challenge management and the board in a way that to address the issues that we believe are crucially important from investment perspective. So very timely conversation, great to be part of it. And I look forward to the next one, because it's not, Sabina, as you said, it's not one and done. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Hopefully next time we'll be all together face to face. Dr. Atacan, do you have any final words to share with us?
I'll give the floor to Güven, because he got cut a couple of times. But it was a pleasure. Amazing insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Güven.
I just
final words.
I just changed.
And congratulations, of course.
Thank you. Hope it helps, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but my finishing comments repeat of what I said at the beginning. So ambitious targets, measurement and follow-up, work through the tiers, and include stakeholders. This is the thing I think we should keep going, because this is something that we never reduce or disconnect the energy going forward.
Excellent conversation. Great to seeing you all and hearing from you. And we hope that the competition, like Ford Otosan's competition, follows them in the path that gender equality is one step closer to us. Thank you for all your time. Thank you for all the effort that you shared with us. Before we close, I will probably give the floor to President of the 30% Club, Mr. Ahmet Dördüncü, which has closing remarks for us. Thank you, and let's hope to see you next year in person, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.